Well, welcome, welcome. Happy Wednesday. It's Wednesday. I am off. We had spring break or fall break this week, so I am a little off, but welcome. I'm so happy to have all of you guys here today. We are moving on with our emotionally intelligent series, and we are talking about leading with EQ today. We're going to talk heavily about cultivating a psychologically safe environment to thrive. So, I'm going to give you guys some thoughts on yourself, and I'm going to give you guys some thoughts on the organizations with whom you are involved. So, with that, if you have no idea who I am, I'm Dr. Claire Muselman. I am a professor of practice at Drake University, and I love to study human behavior. So, this has been my wheelhouse for a while, and we cultivated this series for the 2023 and into 2024 year to really look at what is it that is needed for us to be emotionally intelligent, and how do we help foster that within all the people that we work or we interact with or whatnot. So today we're going to dive into what does a psychologically safe environment look like, and how do we independently use that to create amazing feelings and dynamics. This is meant to be an interactive session. So if you want to come off mute, I'm here for it. And if you're like, nope, you can totally use the chat function and we will have fun with that as well. So today, why are we even talking about this? So we know that organizations are better when we are able to have a dynamic that makes people feel seen, heard, acknowledged, and validated. And there are a ridiculous amount of studies that were done pre-pandemic and even post-pandemic about this. So Gallup did a study back in 2019. This is before the pandemic, talking about how empowered organizations encourage people. Crazy. And this doesn't mean micro organizations of under 9 people or the macro organizations that are thousands and thousands of people. We're talking about when you look at your subset of people with whom you interact, this ends up being a really big thing. So how are we encouraging one another? And I'm going to ask you to do some of your own self-reflection. And then I'm going to ask how you show up for other people. So on a regular basis, we've got about 85% of employees that are disengaged. Not everyone feels real fruitful in their career path. And maybe that could be you some days, and maybe that's not. 64% of employees had received zero appreciation within the past 12 months. Again, this was pre-pandemic. Not sure that might have gotten better, but something to think about. And then organizations that have engaged employees end up being more profitable. Now, the statistic that we're using here is 21% more profitable. I'm going to guess that is much higher these days. And one of the most important elements to focus on when we are looking at this for the why are we talking about this today, the lack of negative feedback is not positive feedback. So just because no one is saying something to you does not mean that people still don't need to be seen, heard, acknowledged, and valued. The absence is not going to translate. This is I'm going to talk to you guys about how you leave interactions either better or worse. There is no in between. So this kind of assimilates to that, where just because there's no negative feedback does not mean that people feel positive about their job. Something to think about. And can anyone answer this for me? Please come off of mute. I would love to hear you. When is the best time to tell your employee that you appreciate them? Can anyone guess this?
All of the time.
All of the time is a great answer. This is a joke question, kind of, where it is the best time to tell somebody that you love them or you appreciate them is before someone else does. So something to think about. So if you are worried about losing employees and whatnot, you should tell them how grateful you are for them before they leave. This is also a really fascinating concept when working with people. Sometimes we know people are starting to look for a new job and we're like, well, we'll just give them more money, or we're going to give them more freedom or flexibility or autonomy or whatever that's going to look like, where they should have been getting it all along. And so this is where we start to look at the compensation structure of organizations. When you hire new people, are you also right sizing your current employees? We all know, especially being in the insurance space or coming from claims, or depending on what organization you are coming to us from, a lot of times you have to bounce to get paid. So is there some truth to maybe we would have more loyalty if we actually right sized compensation on the front end instead of always trying to pay people on the back end? Something to think about. So as we move on, I want you to think about this. When you go into an organization, you're like, I'm going to be here. This is where I'm going to spend some time of my life, and I'm going to be contributing to my greater good or whatever your mission, vision, and values are for your own life. Do you want to be a number or do you want to be an asset? Anybody that wants to participate? I think I know where we're going, but I want to make sure.
Asset.
Yes. Thank you, Shirley. I appreciate you very much today. We want to feel like we're an asset. Like, yes, thank you, Samantha, Monica, Melly. Yes, we all want to feel like we are an asset to an organization. So now let's break this down. When we start looking at this, I want you to think about your current situation with your leadership structure. And I want you to think about, how does your leader make you feel? And you do not have to be vocal on this, but I want you to reflect on that. Does your leader actually take the time to get to know you as a person where you are valued as an asset? Or are you treated like a number? Are you treated like a human being where if you need something, you can go ask? Or are you treated like, why are you bothering me? What are you doing here? So when we look at this, like, how does your leader make you feel? Our goal, if we're looking at employee engagement and we're looking at empathy and we're looking at emotional intelligence and compassion and care of human beings operating in a world where we need to focus on human capital, the idea is that we would be feeling great. My leader makes me feel valued and validated so that people will go above and beyond, and that your position within your organization is important. So I want you to think about that and just think about, how does your leader make you feel? Because we're going to go into this a little bit more in depth. Validated and somewhat valued. I am glad to hear that. That is good. That means some of us are doing something right. Okay, now I want to flip it. I want you to think about this. How do you make people feel? So I have to think about this in a plethora of angles, since I am in the organizational side of life, as well as working with students and having them, how do I leave them feeling? You know, it's very interesting right now when we're managing a lot of different aspects and we're looking at mental health as a whole. And I'm going to touch on mental health a little bit today. When we think about this, like, how do you make people feel? And is there any avenue? So Samantha talks about valued. I love that. Gina's talking about being seen and heard. All right, Gina, if you don't mind, would you mind sharing, how do you make people feel seen and heard? What does that look like from your seat today in your work?
Yeah, I would say first start by actually getting to know them as a person, because they're more than their work, and their outside life is going to affect their work. So sometimes you can have a really great employee that does consistently great work and they're just in a rut, So if you know that something's going wrong outside of work, you can kind of nip things in the bud and kind of give them the support that they need then.
Absolutely. I like that. This is important. Like, getting to know your people is a really, really, really big thing. And there has always been this, I don't want to say if it's a dichotomy about like work is work and home is home, and we don't blend the two models. But if we haven't paid attention, there's no work-life balance anymore. It's kind of a continuum. It is like, where are we spending our time? Where are we valuing things? So the three most important areas that we have are our time, our talents, and our treasures. How much do you know about your people, of where they like to spend those? And how much time do you talk to them about what they are doing outside of the work world? This is where we're looking at people as an asset versus people as a number. So then the other question then we go into, so how do I make people feel? But then how do I leave people? So when you walk away for a desk or when you hang up a phone call, are people feeling like, yes, I'm empowered, I've got enough autonomy, I know what I'm doing with my job, like I can feel good about the work I'm doing? What does that look like? And so when's the last time you've checked in on this? This is important. And it's important to do pulse checks on a regular basis, because today we're talking about emotional intelligence and psychological safety. And this is where, if your people aren't talking, there's a reason. And so we want to figure out what that is. And again, flipping that to how you're working in an organization. Do you feel like you can step forward, or do you feel that you have a voice that can be heard and that somebody will do something with it? So a little bit of this. So as we look through this, we've got to ask ourselves, am I the problem? Is it me? And I ask this in a couple of fronts. Maybe you are the best leader on the face of the earth and you work for the most amazing company on the face of the earth. We all have an opportunity to expand and grow in our emotional intelligence and psychological safety, because it's also about the ripple effect. And so a lot of times things will occur in our organization and we don't say anything. Well, it's not my team, or it's out of my boundary. And I'm going to ask you to challenge that today for a couple of reasons. Um, Number one, you are responsible for the energy that you bring into a room. So when we're talking about psychological safety, and maybe we have leaders that aren't doing their best work, we can still show up as our best self and try and help facilitate and foster an environment where our team members do feel valued. If you aren't able to have this type of ability to speak up, I'm always happy and helpful when it comes to these type of scenarios, but you're responsible for that. And so then what do you stand for? And this kind of I want to take this in a spin of like, what does your personal brand say about you? So when you are responsible for that energy that you are bringing into a room, how do you make people feel when you're with them? So Gina, I'm going to come back to you since you said, it's important that you make people feel seen and heard. So when you're in a work environment with your team or your peers or whatnot, how do you set yourself up to be successful, to help your team feel seen and heard? What do you do starting with yourself first before you start to go into your people?
So depending on what it is, if there's a new topic that's being breached or something like that, I want to make sure that I'm as knowledgeable as possible so I can answer any questions, because while it's okay to say, I don't know that and let me go get the answer for you, if I can have the answers up front, I want to be able to give that to them. I also want them to feel comfortable asking those questions, and knowing that if I say I don't know and I'm going to get the answer, that they know that I'm actually going to do that also.
You know what you are doing by also saying like, hey, if I don't have the answer, I'll get it for you. You're respecting everyone's time. Thank you. Because I think we've all in our careers at some point, that leader that is going to sit there and research it until they find it. And literally it could be you and another employee, and there's multiple people here all waiting just for that answer when everyone else could have gone and done something else. And you'll get back to them with that time. This is fascinating. I was working with a group yesterday and we were talking about how many pointless meetings that they sit through. And how, like, is it appropriate to decline a meeting? And I'm of the opinion that if I do not know what my purpose is to be at this meeting, I don't know what my why is, I don't know what I'm being asked for, I say yes. Because I have yet to ever have somebody come back and ask me why I'm not attending if there is not a purpose to the meeting, like explaining why the meeting is happening, how we're going to get there, and what we hope to achieve. Like time is our biggest asset. So when we're thinking about this, creating these emotionally intelligent and psychologically safe environments, respect becomes a two-way street. So how are you using people's time with this? And if you are the leader or you are the head of the group that needs people's time, how are you being responsible with everybody else's expectations as well? So if you're going to have a meeting with 20 people, do you expect all 20 people to have a voice in this? Do you expect them to all participate? And if this is more of an information sharing session, does this end up being something that could have been an email? So this is where we're responsible for the energy that we bring into that room. And also we are responsible with our own time and how we show up as ourselves to be able to push into our people, to pour into our staff, what that looks like. Okay, so the basic definition of emotional intelligence. Here we go. The ability to understand the way people feel, as well as how they react, to use the skill and make good judgments and to avoid or solve problems. So I want you guys going to open this up again. Yes. Oh, I like Shirley. That is awesome. Shirley says, I once heard someone say, no agenda, no attenda. I love that. This is how we hold people accountable and be respectful and responsible with our own time, which is Time is really the only currency. So something to think about. I love that. So I'm going to have to steal that. That's so great. Okay. So why is it important that we have leaders and organizations that are emotionally intelligent? I'm going to open this up to you guys. Why? Like, what about this concept do we know is needed? And why is it important?
I think it creates a safe place for you to throw out ideas and know that if it doesn't work out or work out the way you intended, but pivots in another way, that's okay.
I love that. Anything anyone else would like to add? That's okay. That's all right. This is an environment that if you choose to share, great. And if not, that's okay too. Think about who you like to work for. Like, have you ever had the boss that was like amazing where you would go to the end of time for? It's usually because you're going to feel valued and validated in that process. So being able to ask the questions to spear innovation. Innovation is such a huge buzzword right now. And I think that's also why you're starting to see more of this like nose to the grindstone with why are we not being more emotionally intelligent? People need to know that it's okay to not be perfect and that sometimes we're going to throw ideas out, and this is where we go to the whole there is no dumb question, but we've got to also be willing to put ourselves out there and ask the questions or throw out the ideas. And there is a lot of punitive issues that can exist within an organization. So this is why we've got to get good as the leaders and as people who are responsible for the energy that we bring into a room. How do we make sure that this is going to be something that is going to help move us in the right direction? So when we start looking at it from this standpoint, this is where we start looking at the psychologically safe environment. And this is where if you have leaders that aren't fantastic, this is where we step up and start showing them. Because you've got two options in life. You can either start to be that change that's going to exist, or you can leave, because sitting there and doing status quo is only going to poison you, and we are here to keep you as good as we possibly can. So again, we're trying to thrive. A lot of us operate on autopilot on a regular basis. We are just in a routine and whatnot. And my goal for you is to wake up and figure out what it is that's going to make you thrive. And sometimes that's going to be challenging the status quo within an organization, within a meeting structure or whatnot. So when we start looking at how do we get to this psychologically safe environment, this is where we start to push the needle a little bit. That's going to be best for everyone. So why does this matter? Well, to Gina's point, we want people to be able to have an environment that we can talk about ideas openly. We can talk about questions openly. So I'm curious to go back to you guys again with our fantastic interactive session. Why do you feel that psychological safety is important in your world? And we can even expand this beyond just a workforce. What about in your relationships? What about your friendships or family members, or maybe with your partner? What does that look like as a parent? Why do we need psychological safety?
I'll speak from experience.
Awesome. Please do.
I'm an introvert, and psychological safety at the workplace really helps me come out of my comfort zone. It helps me speak up. It helps me take risks. My team is really great about taking everyone's input, making you feel heard, making you feel like a person and not like a number. So working in the company that I am in now has really helped me learn and value what psychological safety at the workplace is.
I love that. Now, is there someone that helps you feel this way? Is it more of a team dynamic? Is it the culture? Is it all of the above? None of the above?
Thankfully, it's the culture and everyone at the agency. I work for a really great company. This is the first time ever that I can say anything nice, or not say anything at all, right?
No, I
Yeah,
get
no,
that. I get
it's a
that.
whole group effort. Everybody really just values everybody as a person, as a whole individual. Yeah.
It's interesting when you start to see people as human beings and not commodities, which is
Yes.
fascinating. And these younger generations that are I'll say in working with one of the younger generations that is coming into the workforce, they won't tolerate it. Like they want to be treated like people. And it's kind of fascinating to look back and see what we've tolerated and to understand why. And so this is where like I'm going to ask you guys to practice some radical bravery over the next couple of weeks, and I'll talk more about what that looks like. But thank you for explaining that. Would anyone else like to share on why psychological safety is important? Just period. Or what it is for you? That is totally fine. All right, so I'll speak from experience. I need to know that there is this psychologically safe environment so I can fail. And I say that in a way that's like, it's not about like the failure where it's either success or failure, but it's you don't have to do it my way, just don't do it wrong. And there's 100 other ways or 1,000 other ways that something could get achieved. But if I don't feel like I have the support or I'm not able to ask the right questions, we get into this perfectionist mentality where it's like, I have to succeed or I'm going to fail, where it's a continuum. And there's always an opportunity to learn. And so if we're really trying to help people grow, failure is a part of that growth. And we end up having a lot of fear behind this because of the shame and the guilt. And this is where a lot of this can come from our childhood upbringing, early career paths with leaders that maybe weren't super great. And we get boxed into this, okay, this is how I act in a workplace, or this is appropriate to act in a meeting, or this is not appropriate. And so this is where we're going to start to look at things a little bit differently. And a lot of this ends up impacting our mental health substantially. So mental stability is a big one on this. Thank you for our chat, friends. That's a big one. So let's look at this. Real world abstract. Guess what? 1 in 5 working people have a mental health condition that they have identified. This is only from people from in a study where people chose to state that there was something going on. So when we start looking at this and we start looking at the impact that mental health plays in the workplace, we've got a big issue when it becomes looking at how it translates into dollars and cents and in the investment of our people and how we are showing up and paying attention to what is going on with people. Because I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but the world is not okay right now. We are seeing skyrocketing rates of mental health. You could say that there is a lot more stress going on with our younger generations. There's a lot more with our kids these days, but people have a lot of unrest on a regular basis, carrying around a lot more stress than they have before. And so when we're looking at creating an environment where people are thriving, we've got to be aware of this so that we aren't being a contributing factor. But truthfully, mental health is a leading cause of workplace absence and productivity loss. So if you've got people that aren't showing up or that aren't being productive during the day, that ends up having a pretty big ripple effect, let alone the fact that this is a human being that you've put on your team or is a part of your team. And you genuinely wanted that person to be successful. Just some things for some food for thought. So when we look at this introduction of how we bring this kind of information to the real world and we look about how we're going to use psychological safety to thrive, we look at this from the standpoint of how are we balancing support, performance management, and assessment of capability. So sometimes as leaders, we get frustrated that people don't just get it, but this is where we have to meet people where they are. And again, like once we've hired somebody into our team, this is where it becomes an us problem and how we are going to show up by building out accountabilities, responsibilities, and then follow through. So what type of support is needed within this position? How do we performance manage? Because I think we've all probably been on a team at some point where somebody's not being performance managed and the work product goes down and down and down. And we see that this is happening and yet our leader is doing nothing. Well, that also impacts the rest of the team. So then we have to look at that assessment of capability versus copability. And we think about, okay, do they have the necessary skill sets? Did we make a bad hire? What does that look like? And also what else could be going on? Are there things that we just need to do a little bit differently? Should we think outside the box and try and focus on what we can do to help this person thrive? When we look at like some of the smaller businesses and micro businesses, so micro businesses, there are 1 to 9 people in an organization, and then small businesses build from there. they have a more limited access to mental health resources, and help ends up being much more informal because you've got people that are playing multiple hats in an organization trying to navigate this. When we look more into the mid to large organizations, a lot of times there's a lack of training for their leaders, and things end up being very process oriented and a very go to HR. And so then there's a lot of fear that is driven behind this, instead of trying to just go back to the basics of getting to know your people. What's going on with them? Are there things outside of their control? What could be impacting their productivity? What can we do to try and enhance things in a different lens? So then we start looking at this, when we start looking at how do we actually define psychological safety. And Amy Edmondson is a researcher who states that psychological safety is the belief that one won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistake. So I'm going to open this up again and say, do you have an example of a time where psychological safety was done well in an organization? And if you are comfortable, maybe you have an example of a time that maybe it didn't go so well. Maybe you as a leader, or one that you've observed. Anybody? Shirley, do you have one?
I forget my camera's on.
Oh, I love it.
I
It's
have
great. So
facial
is mine.
expressions, right?
I love it.
So I remember being in a Zoom meeting one time, and not everybody was on camera, but someone brought up a concern in the lines of, and this was for an event industry company. So they brought up a concern where a specific thing that was proposed was not, it would be disrespectful to a certain group of individuals, a religion
Okay.
specifically. I'm
Sure.
I'm just going to leave it very
Yeah.
generic.
Nope. I think
And
generic is great.
and one of the leaders was very quick in shutting down that opinion and just saying, we'll discuss offline. But those concerns were valid in many aspects. And I feel that that leader should have allowed that individual to continue with a proposal and a
Yeah.
solution versus just shutting that person down.
I think that's a really good example, how we respond when people bring these things to our attention. So if we have someone that is bringing a concern or a question, or even just questioning a decision that's been made, how do we respond to that? Because we've got a couple of different factors that go into play. Sometimes we shut people down without intending to shut people down. Sometimes we take a pause and don't realize that exactly how we respond is going to impact everybody here. So not only in that moment that Shirley just gave, did she shut down that person, but he or she, excuse me, made it very clear to the other team members, like, hey, if you bring things up, we might just tell you, nope. And then it changes the dynamic that exists within an organization, where had the concern been fully displayed, and then maybe got some feedback, maybe not, and then just said, hey, you know what? That's a great concern. This is probably not the best place to address it, but can we talk more about it offline? The tone you use, how you let somebody give a grievance or a concern or ask a question or give an idea. You might not use the idea, but getting everybody's idea or trying to get everyone's perspective or buy-in. Because remember, at this point, if we're sitting around a group in this capacity, this is a meeting worth attending, where you do have value, that you are being asked to have insight. So again, to shut somebody's idea down just because of whatever the circumstance might be is not going to have a good ripple effect with the other people that are there. Things to think about when we start looking at situations that we have been in, as well as situations where I'm sure we could have done things better. So this goes twofold. But really, how do you want to continue to spur learning? And I just love, because every organization right now is like innovation, 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 but don't think outside the box. just funny when we start to look at things along these lines. So, talk about some of the benefits that exist with the psychological safety. Shocker, you can have higher levels of innovation and creativity. And this is where I go back to, you don't have to do it my way. It just can't be done wrong. So if we're looking at things, there's a bajillion ways to get from point A to point B, depending on what organization you're in, what your wheelhouse is, your industry, it does not matter. There's not a one-way street on this. And so to be able to spur creativity and learning can also help each other ping pong off. So let's say Shirley presents an idea and then Gina wants to spur off of that and be like, hey, I love what you're thinking. What if we even did this? And this is where we start to see effective brainstorming. And you let these ideas start to bake out real time where people feel that they can actually have a voice and then what gets done with it. So maybe you can do something with it. Maybe you can't. We're going to talk about communication here in a second too, where how much communication are you actually giving back when things are going on? Some of the other benefits of psychological safety, when we talk about highlighting problems earlier, we don't know what we don't know. So if you don't have an open door policy or people feel like they can come talk to you, this is where issues arise. And I spent about 20 years in workers' compensation. This is one of the big things. If you have an injured worker that doesn't feel like they can talk to their employer or their claims adjuster, we have issues because if something is wrong and they don't feel like they can go to you, there is issues that stem. And this could be put into a plethora of ways to think about it. But this is one of the easiest ways that if something's going wrong or things feel awful or there's just a gut intuition or there's things like this, we want to be able to know now so we can fix it. I can't do anything. I can't fix something I don't know about, nor can I elevate it or escalate it where it needs to go. So again, we also have improved productivity and performance because it's people need to know that it's okay that they're not going to be perfectionists. There was a study I was reading about last week that talked about kids who thrive in classrooms that are not meticulously organized. So we always see the amazing teachers that are doing an awesome thing with their perfect, this goes in this box and this goes in this box and this goes in this box. Actually, if the room is slightly messy, kids end up being more creative and have better decision-making skills because they aren't being led to think they have to be perfect. Well, shouldn't that translate into the adult world too? And while it might not be a physical surroundings, the metaphorical could exist in this way as well. When you've got psychological safety, there are higher levels of inclusivity and diversity. Shocker on that one. And then also you get happier employees, and a happy employee equals a productive employee. So these aren't things that we don't know. It's just interesting to start thinking about them again. And then what are we going to do with this information? So how do we create authentic relationships? Because this is one of the biggest pieces. So when we talk about getting to know people so that they're not just a number, how do you guys do that? Or how have you seen leaders do this in an effective manner? I'm happy to listen to you guys, or I'm happy to throw out some ideas.
So we have a couple different ways where we get together with our leaders and our teams.
Sure.
So we have one-on-ones typically on a monthly basis. And it can be anything from things going on in the organization and projects you're working on to what's going on in your life and everything in between. But then also with team building, like we'll get out of the office and maybe we'll go do Pinot's palette or something along those lines where the stress of the actual building that you may report to or being in front of a screen is kind of relieved, and you can kind of just, I mean, a lot of these things nobody's great at anyway, so you can just kind of let go and the perfectionism isn't there then. It's just we're getting together and seeing what we can do and having conversations and learning about each other's lives outside of work also.
I love that. Love, love, love.
Similar
There we
with
go.
similar with the company that I work in. I'm in the HR department, and we have quarterly offsite get-togethers. They're not even called meetings. We go to like Dave and Buster's and actually do games and not just sit and drink, or let people be in their own little cohorts. Everybody participates in the event. We also have all staff meetings where we always give shout outs to people that we work with throughout the week or in the month. And we do games, get to know about people's personalities, the pets they have, things they love, hobbies that they enjoy doing, just getting to know everyone on a personal level.
Okay, so talk to me more about the cohorts. When you're getting to know each other, does somebody start out first? How do
Yes.
you cultivate that?
Yeah. So we actually have a group. It is and oh goodness, I forget the name of them. I don't know why. But anywho, it's a group of HR folks and folks of other departments that come up with ideas for employees to do in their departmental meetings. We just don't call them meetings, but we always have that one person that leads and has either things at people's tables where they can just start writing and answering questions and get everybody engaged. Oh, it's the
I like,
engagement team. It's the
oh, that's
engagement
great.
team. Yes.
Okay, so those are some amazing ways on how we start to build these relationships. What are some ways that you have seen these not go well? Because sometimes we can think about, yes, in a perfect world, here's how these go well. How are some ways that we have seen these not go so well? And not to pick on you guys that are talking, Gina and Shirley, but I would love it if you guys could give us an example, because you guys have given really good things, but there's a reason that those go well now, because they haven't always been perfect, would be my guess.
Yeah, and I think psychological safety wax and wanes a bit, depending on what's going on in your company and things like that. We have been pushing psychological safety as one of our innovation behaviors for a couple years now. And in our department right now specifically, they're having a bit of a hard time with it, because they actually gave somebody that I would consider a bit of an aggressor an award for psychological safety. And people were talking, there had been complaints to both management and HR about this specific person, and when you have your VP giving him an award for this, multiple people just felt ultimately defeated. So we are currently working on attempting to rebuild that trust and the psychological safety now because of this. Yeah, I saw your face there too. That's the way we all were.
I know, I know. So how well do you think that we do as a whole of educating people on psychological safety? Because I feel like this is kind of like the innovation space when we talk about, hey, we want to be the most innovative company. We're going to put it in our values and we're going to put it in our mission statement. But how well do you think we do it actually educating leaders with, here's how you actually behave like a real person? We spent so much time, if you look at how organizations have kind of come through our change agent machines. Let's just go pre-COVID. Not sure that you saw this as much maybe pre-COVID, and maybe some of your organizations were already ahead of the game with this. But as we look at post, and we've kind of started to level the playing field where hierarchy is interesting because we're all people, we're all multifaceted, we all have things going on. How well do we do at educating people on what psychological safety actually is? And then how well do we hold leaders accountable for it?
I think for some leaders, it's just a buzzword and that there needs to be more training on it. Because, especially our leaders that are a little bit older, they were taught to suck up a lot of things and to just deal and not to comment about the stress and the anxiety, and mental health wasn't talked about. So now when you have these things being brought up, they don't know exactly how to work through this or deal with it without training, because they never had it before and they didn't have anybody also being the person that they could look up to either.
Oh, so that's a good one. Modeling. Modeling. So what do you think it would take? What does it take for somebody to be that first step forward to start sharing this? So I call it radical bravery, because I think a lot of times we're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be punitive.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I mean, I feel like it's a big breath in and then just let it out. Like almost like you're spewing out what you're thinking and being the first one to be able to take that, and hopefully it gains support and kind of has that snowball
Yeah.
effect.
So has anyone,
Somebody
sorry,
has to
you
rip the
finish.
Band-Aid off. No, somebody has to rip the Band-Aid off.
Okay, so another question for you guys, and thank you for participating. If anyone else wants to hop in, please do. Have you ever had any type of retaliation for being somebody that puts that foot forward? And I hope the answer is no. Let's just go with that. But I don't know. Because a lot of times I'm wondering if when we're trying to do these things, we get in this fear base where it's like, well, I don't know that I should say something because we have like this fear of the unknown. But I'm curious if anyone has actually felt that retribution where it's like, okay, I did speak up. I did say something, and this was my experience in the process, or I was trying to help start doing things and acting or behaving or showing up differently or whatnot. And this is what happened. I really hope everyone stays silent because that would mean that we're making progress. It would. I don't know if
I
that's gonna
have an example
happen.
of a couple of years ago.
Sure.
Oh, this is even embarrassing to talk about, but um,
Hey,
I
you are
had
in
a,
a safe space with us,
okay,
and this will help us learn and grow
yes,
collectively,
I
which I'm
had
here for.
a VP. I was an office manager at that time, and I managed a whole work site, did several tasks, HR, payroll, benefits, just a little bit of everything. And I had the VP of that location ask me to scan a newspaper clipping. Well, the newspaper clipping was of Charlie Brown. It's the comedy section.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it doesn't have a lot of verbiage. It's really just a cartoon, basically. But the cartoon was of Charlie Brown um, making comment about illegal aliens hiding in the pumpkin patch. And I took offense to that because number one, my husband and his father were farmers,
Sure.
and I just didn't think it was appropriate for him to ask me to scan that for him just for his amusement. I felt he could have taken a picture of it and sent it to whomever he wanted to. But anywho, I spoke up because there were other inappropriate things he had done previously that I didn't speak up on.
Yeah.
So I actually did reach out to the HR director, and I, explained what had happened, and they spoke to him, obviously, because he then called me into his office. And he didn't reprimand me per se, but he very politely let me have it. So I very politely let him have it as well. And I just said it was inappropriate. I didn't think it was funny or a joke. He could have taken a picture of it and sent it to someone. I didn't think it was appropriate for him to ask me to do that. And he just kind of brushed it off and said it was a joke. It was a joke I was sending to my son. And I just had to put my foot down again and say, I found it offensive. My husband was a farmer at a very young age, and so was his father. And I just didn't think it was appropriate. And I didn't think it was appropriate for him to call me into his office saying it was just a joke.
Yes, that would be the opposite of,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah. So
I would
that
not
was,
want to work there.
well, I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
But, that was the culture that company just represented. So I learned very quickly in many ways that was not the place for me.
I'm proud of you for saying something because I'm sure that there's always that little bit like, "Ah, okay, I can just deal with it." But by you saying something, you sharing that story like ripples to me where I'm like, okay, when I see something, I do need to say something. So your bravery in that is really powerful. And thank you for again saying that here because when you do it, it means that somebody else can do it as well. And even though you might not be able to see that ripple effect of the bravery that you've exhibited, I guarantee you it's going to make a difference. So thank you for saying. I'm really sorry that that happened too. The ignorance that exists in a lot of companies. I'm not, I'm not shocked by. This is where I just want to make sure that you guys have all the tools possible to be that change so that we can go on showing how to promote a healthy environment where people thrive, because nobody wants to be on autopilot. We are here to live and to be. And so thank you for sharing that. Okay, so we've talked a few both scenarios. Some of the most amazing things to actually start to get to build a team are to figure out who your people are when they don't identify with their job. Because again, we can identify with what we do, but that's not necessarily who we are. So this is where asking people more about themselves and asking open-ended questions, asking check-in questions. I had a group of students in here earlier today. I'm like, hey, how are you guys' mental health? They're like, are we doing okay? Like, is what pulse check? We're coming back from fall break. Do you guys feel restored? Do you not? We talked about how there was a time during COVID where there was no mental break time. They did not have fall break or spring break during this time, and we just shoved it all together, which caused a lot of burnout. So I like to ask that stuff. So when we start looking at what are some things that you can do to help do this, and I think one of the biggest pieces is getting to know people outside of that job. So what's important to them? What do they value? Simple things. This is where do they spend their time, talent, and treasures when they're not in your office, working next to you on a Zoom? What does that look like? What's important? And asking the right questions on a regular basis. So it's not like an interrogation of tell me all of these things about you. I want to know, but it's all about building this relationship and also offering some pieces of yourself. This is where that vulnerability piece comes in. With how can you find ways to be a human connector where it's like, oh, that's true for me too, or I know something about that. Yeah, just things like that that can really help to start foster making a difference. So I want to ask this piece, which this one's going to get a little bit more dicey, and I'm interested to hear your feedback on this. When we talk about what is fair, so when we are working in leadership roles and we're not, how do we understand that psychological safety is trying to bring in that protection of idea sharing, identity sharing, bringing in innovation? How do we keep things fair? And I use fair in quotation marks because a lot of this is going to be up to personal discretion. So I'm going to give an example from yesterday when I was presenting. I had a group tell me about that they were switching out dress codes, which if anyone ever saw The Office, dress code casual Fridays, this is no joke, but we have this group. They're going to go and change some of their dress code violation or dress code policies so that you can wear hats and you can wear sports teams and whatnot. It's just more for conversation starters with their clients. And so one of the pictures on this diagram is that a man can wear a tracksuit, but a woman cannot wear a tracksuit because it hugs her body too closely. So I ask you, when we start to look at some of these things that exist, and we're looking at how we cultivate psychological safety, what do we figure out? Like, how do we know something is fair? If you're going to treat one person this way and another person this way, if we start to notice, or we know certain things about people, so we're trying to keep these personal issues confidential, or if we've got this psychologically safe environment where somebody is going to share pieces of that, how do we continue to hold space for that while still keeping items confidential and also still getting support and training people on these issues? Again, all kind of stemming back to what's fair. Gina, I'm going to pick on you because I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, you still have me thinking over here because I feel
Sure.
like what's fair for one may not be fair for somebody else. So
Agreed.
I almost want to say that it might be situational, but when you start hearing people murmuring or talking or shutting up when you walk into a room, maybe you need to start having those conversations about what's going on. Am I missing out on something? Is there something that's upsetting you or things like that? Because we're also not mind readers. So if you don't know, you can't fix the situation.
We talked about that. Yes.
And I think like in our office, we have one gentleman who wears a hat almost every day. And it's weird because nobody else does. I don't know that it's ever been put in the dress code whether or not you could wear a hat. But nobody's ever questioned it. He's really quiet. Nobody else does it. So they just let him do it. I personally think that's personally fine. You know, I don't see anything with it, but I could see how other people might be upset by that because it's not considered professional and we're still technically business casual. So I don't
Sure.
know. I think it's really situational, but you got me thinking here on this one because fair is so subjective.
It is. It is. And how you do, it was interesting because we've talked about this, and I'm going to move on to this next slide because it gives a little bit more. So a goal is for a leader to feel confident in what they're going to define as fair. So what does that look like? When we look at it from like a human resources standpoint, we're looking at it more for protection of the company, but we're looking at this more from a psychological safety standpoint. So if I'm going to define something as fair for one of my employees, that's because that employee and I have a different understanding of what their needs are than maybe employee C or employee F or whomever. And so this is where we start to look at this interesting, and I'm going to have you guys like mirror it onto yourselves. Or do you feel confidence in your ability or your backing of your organization to be able to make decisions like this on what's fair? And when we're looking at, again, the whole purpose of today is to look at how do we create these psychologically safe places to thrive? Well, having a leader that can either defend their people, stand up for their people, make decisions about is this professional, is this not professional, without having a fear of retribution is a big piece of that. Helps people feel more engaged. Some of the things that I think that are also important are looking at the education that goes into a lot of these things. And I love that we're sticking with the closed stuff because it's something that's kind of easy, but it's also fascinating to me. A lot of people have stuff that's just going on in general. And so maybe there is more to a story than we ever know. And so when we have those moments where you walk into a room and people clam up, it's like, okay, do you feel that you are able to then go ask that person later on or that group later and be like, hey, can you help me understand? And will you actually get an honest answer from them? It's interesting because I like to call those things out now. And I'm not sure if younger Claire or first leader Claire could have done that because of how we've groomed and how we have been taught within our workplaces about what is acceptable and what's not. So I want you to think about some of the most important leadership attributes that exist because we are all leading ourselves first before we ever work with a team, a group, whether we are a formal leader or an informal leader. There's a big piece to this. So I like how Gina's like, if you walk into a room and people clam up, what is the perception? And is it about you? Is it about a decision you made? What does that look like? So when we are building trust and transparency within teams, it's either a plus or a minus. There's no middle ground. And it kind of fluctuates on a continuum. And again, if we're trying to cultivate this psychological safety where people can feel like they can come talk to us, what does that trust look like? And I like to look at this also on a respect continuum. Like if you're going to offer me this respect, I'm going to offer this back to you. And so, but if you disrespect me in this process, then we need to talk about that. So then it's also looking at understanding other people's behaviors. So how am I leaving them feeling? And what does that say? Does that say about our culture? What does that say about that person? Is there something else that I should be knowing? And how do I start to build that trust if I feel that it is not where it should be? Or if there are ways that we could be doing things differently, better, how much are they talking to me? Is it actual feedback that I want worth having? And then we look at communication. So communication can be looked at like how clear are we communicating? Are we effective communicators? Is there purpose behind the communication? And I'll flash back to earlier in this hour where we're talking about meetings. Like, are we actually being respectful of people's times? And the same could go for any type of other communication. Do you have employees that blow up your phone? Are you blowing up your employee's phone? What do we do from a respect standpoint of time management? And then also, like when a message is any type of communication is exchanged, is it meaningful and purpose driven? Is there a why behind it? And is that one of the first communication points that we're starting out when we are going to be interrupting someone's workday, asking for time in a meeting, asking to distract from an email, or sending any type of other electronic communication? So I'm curious, what are some things that now that we've kind of started to talk through this, we've started to talk about psychological safety, we're starting to look at how do we start thriving. I really want to kind of focus more on that disruption. What do we allow? What do we tolerate? And what have we kind of just gone on with? And Gina, I think the hat example is great. Okay, that doesn't bother you, not a big deal. Shirley, to what you said about like, I was not scanning that in. Like, no, I was not going to tolerate that. And so I'm not going to ask you guys to share this because I think this stuff gets a little personal and I want you guys to be able to have a space where you can think about it. If you ever want to ping me and talk to me about this stuff, I am here for it. But what do you tolerate? Because again, you're responsible for the energy. Ooh, this is what's fun about my office. It'll shut its light off. Whatever you tolerate. So you're responsible for the energy that you bring into a room. If you're the leader of that group, you are also responsible for what is tolerated within that space. And so this is where we've got to look at things from what type of expectations are set forth, what kind of accountability is going to play, and then where does the responsibility fall? So if we're going to talk about and use this lip service about, I want a psychologically safe environment. This is what I'm looking for. We've got to establish some expectations on the front. Like this will be tolerated. This won't. Like anything that's said in this space is a free space for people to actually explore what's going on. And then if somebody would take it outside of that, how do you hold people accountable? And this is where the leadership stuff gets a little icky because if anyone saw Barbie, Ken makes this comment about how leadership's great until I realized there were no horses. It's great until stuff gets icky and then it's not so fun. So what happens if somebody crosses that psychological safety boundary and ends up harming someone from an intellectual standpoint, an emotional standpoint, hopefully not physical at our adult stage, but when that gets crossed, how do you show up then? And this is where I look at, this is that radical bravery. Like, when you see something, do you say something? And what ends up being the implications that result of it? Sometimes it's just 10 seconds of operating in that radical bravery of going to HR, of stepping forward and saying like, hey, we don't tolerate that here. That's not welcome here. So what does that look like to help establish a further credibility within your organization and your team to make sure that that continues to foster this environment that does have a psychologically safe viewpoint to it? And I love this quote from Brene Brown because I think it is so imperative when we're looking at how we start to shift environments. If you want to make a difference, the next time you see someone being cruel to another human being, and you guys, I mean this in any capacity, something that's offensive, something that shouldn't have been said, maybe somebody's not getting a chance to speak or they're getting talked over, take it personally. It is personal. Take it personally because it is personal. And this is where, if we want cultures to start to shift, we are the ones that we've been waiting for. We're the ones that start doing this by having these conversations, by you guys being here today. We lead with emotional intelligence by showing up as ourselves and as being that change. It's going to take forever to start stuff at the top, but we can show people by executing in some radical bravery of 10 seconds of just a real true belief in ourselves that we can do this differently and we can have amplify someone else's voice that may be getting talked over repeatedly in a meeting. So this is where it's not just seeing something, it's saying something, and how that communication piece ends up having its ripple effect.